Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regular meeting of Fernie City Council held at 6:30 p.m. on September 10th, 2024. Kisuk Yukit, we acknowledge that the city of Fernie is located within Kukinamakis, the unceded territory of Yakutat Nucleat. We recognize that we live and work in their vast lands. Ikanahunik are from Yakutat Nucleat and are members of the Tanaha-speaking peoples of British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. And quickly before I call the meeting to order, I wanted to commend our fire department for dispatching 3 firefighters and a piece of equipment to support the Baines Lake fire yesterday evening. And as I understand, the evacuation order has been rescinded. So a job well done, and I know the community of Baines Lake is grateful. I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda with this recommendation that the agenda be amended to include a late attachment for item 11.1, Arcadis City of Fernie Fire Hall final report, and that the agenda be adopted as amended. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Ramadas. Is there any discussion? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Now I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the following recommendations: that the minutes of the August 27th, 2024 regular council meeting be adopted. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor McIsaac. Is there any discussion? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. I'll now open the floor to public participation and invite the public in attendance or participating electronically who wish to comment on items listed on the meeting agenda in accordance with section 3.7.3 of the procedure bylaw to address council, except speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of the bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit. And a speaker may only address council for a maximum of 3 minutes. And so we'll start by looking at our gallery and see if anybody would like to speak. Please approach the podium, identify yourself and your civic address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Hey guys, if I'm going down the wrong track, stop me. Josh Gowerlick, Fernie, 112 Bremer Road. Thanks for having me. So I've moved back. I'm born and raised in Fernie, moved back here last year. It's been great to be back. Love it. The idea of the fire hall is fantastic. My questions and concerns are, you would just talk to the fact that the RDEK used these guys, this group of wonderful lifesavers. And to make it clear, I'm from the camp that these guys deserve whatever facility they need. I think that we should be building things bigger and better than we need in the future, because building things to today sometimes isn't the best. But the idea of us coming up with $20 million here, and it sounds like a lot of money. Really, that's 15 houses in Fernie, right? 15 beat down houses in Fernie is worth $20 million these days. But if the RDEK and the ski hill is going to use it, how much are they paying? And why is the ski hill only paying 6 to 1 to us right now? So for my $6 that I put in, the ski only has put $1 for these guys, right? So what did RDEK put in yesterday for that fire? I just want to know if we're paying our fair share, if they are. I guarantee if it was any other private industry, if it was tech or some other private industry that required this fire hall, they'd be putting in a little bit more than the ski hill. So those are my comments, my concerns. And once again, thanks to these guys. They never get enough recognition. They're awesome. They're lifesavers, and let's give them what they deserve. But I don't know. Fernie's pretty broke. You guys know that better than anybody. This town doesn't have a whole bunch of money. So let's just be a little smart about it, right? And make sure that we're not just putting it out there for everybody. Thanks.
Thanks for your perspective, Mr. Garlick. Anyone else? Seeing none. Ms. Rhodes, anyone online indicated they'd like to speak? Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to item 11.1, presentation by Arcadis on our fire hall project. Mr. Boranowski.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm just joining to introduce the presentation in this report on the agenda. We have the lead consultant with Arcadis, Sanapon, here to present the final report and recommendations from this pre-planning study. So this represents the conclusion of the first contract towards the fire hall, which was to undertake internal consultation, public consultation, site selection, and get us to a point of conceptual design. That's not a building design, but a conceptual design, conceptual layout, and then costing based on that for budgeting. With that, I will hand the podium over. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So thank you for the intro, Michael. So I just want to give a little precursor. So it's not just me today. I do have a colleague online as well that will speak to the engagement portion that we have undertaken in the last year or so. So we're kind of just swapping back and forth there. So again, thank you for having us. And it has been a process. And I do feel that the steps to what we're presenting today have been very important. We've paid our due diligence to the study and the work we've done. And today we're excited to present some of our findings. So I'm just gonna skip through the introductions quite quickly because our project team is, oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. I'm a Teams user, so Zoom is a little foreign to me. So overall, our project team, the leaders of our group is with Michael and Dustin, and then myself, Susanna. I'm the project architect, and Samuel is our lead planner on the call. But the team is so much more than this. We've obviously had many stakeholder engagements. There's people from our team that are not on this list, and obviously there's Chief Morgan and the fire department that I've met with a couple of times to get all the needs and requirements to build this project. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that has put an effort and time into this project, along with the CWG as well. So quick agenda, just to lay a roadmap of what we'll be discussing today. So Samuel will be taking over for section A here. He'll give a little brief kind of summary of where we've been, where we are right now, and how we got here. And then I will take over and talk about basically the project scope and the project budget. So basically how we arrived at our concept design and how everything was priced, and looking at how potentially some strategies to fund it as well. So I'm just going to hand it over to Samuel, who's online, just to provide us with an overview of where we've been and where we're at right now.
Good evening, Major and Council. If you can hear me well, I'm not seeing the presentation on the screen, but I have a copy here. So I'm assuming that we're on slide number 7, and I'll be speaking to that. It's good to talk to you again after the journey that we have gone with you together. The slide in front of you is summarizing the different phases that were anticipated for the project. And we are finalizing the pre-planning phase, and it lists all the different steps that we've gone through. So we are today presenting the final report and the recommendations for your consideration. Next slide, please. I'm assuming that we're on slide 8 at the moment, and this is just a summary of the journey that we have undertaken with very strong support from you and the City of Fernie team. And I want to take this opportunity to recognize their valuable input and the community's valuable input throughout the process. We've learned a lot. We heard a lot of good positive comments, good positive questions that we've tried to address, and I'm sure that Susanna is going to get into the detail of some of the recommendations that we're going to be presenting to you today. We presented to you several times, and today we're finalizing the process of the pre-planning phase. Next, please. And back to you, Susanna.
Thanks, Sam. So the next section here, I just wanted to quickly go over some of the design guidelines that we use to inform what we do. And first off, I want to start off with the project direction. So this statement that we have up on the screen here is the directive that we received after the engagement process, after site selection process, of what will guide our concept design. So our focus is on a purpose-built and needs-based fire hall, while ensuring that the site is still flexible for future co-users and future growth. So our efforts were directed at a facility for a specified user, which in this case is the fire department. So we built the first phase of the concept design concentrating on providing the community a purpose-built and needs-based fire hall. Within that exercise, we were also very cognizant of the fact that we have to be cost responsible with the building program. So we went back with Chief Morgan and the fire department to sharpen our pencils to see how we can make the fire hall program cost effective, yet still providing a high performance level for the fire department themselves. So the overarching design principles that we applied to both site planning and arranging the building itself came down to overall these 5 major points. So first and foremost, operational efficiency. The response time, response efficiency of the fire department is key. It's an emergency service that services the community. So any way that we can make design help the site, the access, the building itself, the function more efficient for fire response was the concentration of our efforts. So this includes, for example, ensuring the fire trucks have clear access to major routes within the city, down to firefighters having clear access routes to their trucks from the fire station itself. So it goes from a very macro to micro scale when we're looking at the operational efficiency of the design. Dovetailing into that is the workflow optimization. So again, this hones in a little bit more on the spatial planning of the building itself to enable staff and firefighters to be able to work, dispatch, train, store their vehicles, store their equipment in a very organized manner within the building and the site itself. And then through the community engagement pieces, we haven't forgot about the whole community interfacing aspect of what a community building project like this can have opportunities for. So when we're looking at the site and how to place and site the fire hall, we are looking at how to integrate the spaces to incorporate and to encourage community interaction, especially where the site is located. It's in the middle of a big community serving hub. And above and beyond that, we want to ensure that however we lay out the site, we address for future growth, whether this is for future users or even the fire department themselves as they find their needs grow. So allowing the building and the site to be modified and expansion in the future. And finally, back to the cost responsible part, we wanted to ensure that whatever we presented is feasible and also functional for the fire department as well. So what goes hand in hand with our guidelines is obviously what the requirements of our stakeholders are. So we have to consider what are their needs and also what are their wants. Since our mandate for this project was to focus on the fire station, to provide the city with a purpose-built fire station, our primary stakeholder is FFESD. So when we look at the site and when we look at the buildings and how we place them on the site, the function and the operation of the fire hall comes first. And then we look at the secondary stakeholders that were identified during the engagement process, where we use what they brought to the table and potential uses that they want to have offer or can be seen on the site as placeholders and parameters to round out the rest of the site and to ensure that the expansion and the future growth is there as well. So the secondary stakeholders that were identified through the EOI process were the potential co-user of the sites that came forth for Fernie Child Care Society, Elk Valley Family Society, the Wild Site Elk Valley, and also school district number 5. So potential uses that came out, co-uses that came out of our exercises is a much needed child care facility, affordable and social housing, and obviously outdoor amenity spaces since we're in a park setting. So we took the secondary stakeholder parameters and used that to future-proof the site, so to speak. And then we went back to the primary stakeholders and we did exercise with Chief Morgan and his team to really narrow down the program requirements of the fire hall itself. So we prioritized what was essential, what is required, and then what is optional. So weeding out the wants from the needs. And the essential items, we'll get into this a little later in the other slides, are basically those that are prescribed by the governing bodies. So in essence, some of them are actually non-negotiable. They are required for the fire department to function at the level of service that they want to be. So we take all those guidelines and those considerations and we start looking at concept design. And as Michael alluded to before, this is a concept design. It's a solution. It's one of the solutions. It's not the final solution. So we just want to make everybody aware that, you know, as much work as we've done, this is one solution to the problem. As the project moves on, it will get refined and retooled as we go. So the first thing that we looked at is the building functional program. So the building functional program is basically an inventory list of what is required for the fire department to be able to function and operate. So this list was generated at the beginning of the project already. We had our focus group with the fire department and the firefighters, and we got a big list of needs and wants and also wishes. So this time around, we took that list, came back, sharpened our pencil, narrowed down to those 3 categories that I talked about before. What is essential, which is NFPA prescribed. So those are the requirements from the governing body for fire departments to function, whether it's performance or prescriptive. And then column B there is fire department specific needs and also local regulatory like bylaw requirements, zoning, so stuff that is pertinent to the site of the locality of the project. So what is required by the fire department to operate? Items in this list are generally industry standard, but it may differ from in terms of size and scale, depending on where the fire department operates. So just for example, an Alpine Region fire hall may deal with wildfires, like we've heard, in addition to structural fires. So they may have more fire trucks, they may have more equipment, which requires more bays to house, as opposed to like a 2-bay fire station at a typical urban neighborhood where they just typically deal with structural fires. So we have to keep that into context when we're looking at the building program, because although a fire station is very highly prescribed in terms of its program, there are different requirements basically based on where the fire station is located. And finally, column C is, we call them elevated program requirements. So these are optionals and these are part of the bigger wish list. Again, some are site specific, but some are also looking to the future, to future proof. So the idea is that if you can build it now, it will be cheaper to build it now than let's say 5 years down the line. So those are some of the items that we were looking at. We go into great detail this in the report, so I won't bore everybody with it, but it's just an overview of the exercise we went through to sharpen the pencils to kind of bring down the footprint of the building. And then we took that list and then we graphically represented it into a plan. So what you see on the screen right now is a spatial planning diagram. It's not necessarily a building. It's bubbles with different colors showing different relationships to different spaces. And again, this is all based on our conversations with Chief Morgan, the fire department, as well as industry practice standards. So fire stations are pretty highly prescribed buildings. There's only so many ways we can rearrange things. So what I do want to say is that everything that we're showing right now is essential to the operation of the fire hall. So anything that is above and beyond, which are optional items, we have not shown. So this has brought down the approximate building area to 1,492 square meters. So there's approximately 16,000 square feet. So compared to the rest, typical fire stations, it's on average. So it's not overly bigger than the typical ones that have designed in different areas of the same scale. So on the next slide here, again, I won't go into great detail of how we came up with the plans. It's all explained in the report. But overall, what we needed to do for a spatial diagram was to give the project a building footprint. And in order to do that, we had to spatial plan, and we took into considerations like the response paths. different zones in the building and how the public may be able to access. So the one thing that we do want to note on this slide is that we do recognize that there is an opportunity for public multi-use functions within the fire station itself. Again, this layout is one solution, is not the solution. But what we're trying to achieve here is for those bigger meeting spaces. If the fire department is not using it for training, is sitting idle, it can become a municipal city asset to book, to have meetings like this, to even possibly have the community book times to come in. And it's all in the design of how you separate that public access with the fire operations to ensure that their operations aren't hindered by this dual use. So there are, although it's purpose built, there are opportunities to share that space and open it up to the community. So having a building footprint now, we take that and we're able to place it on the site to create a concept site plan. And this is where the bulk of our work happened, is when we're looking at the site, what are those guidelines that drive us to place the building where we have at the moment? So the overall design guidelines for the site echo the ones that for the overall design of the project itself, ensuring that the response efficiency is optimized. So placing the apparatus bay in clear lines with exit paths to major roads. Also ensuring that we are mindful of the existing neighbors and users to this fire hall site. And above and beyond that, enhancing, like making the site greater than what it was before. How do we implement this project whilst build the community and ensure that we have connectivity in and around the site? And obviously, again, as we alluded to, how do we plan for future users, leaving the site flexible enough for the community to make that choice of what will go there in the future? So the first thing we did look at was the existing user access. So on this diagram, we graphically show the current users and the typical paths that they currently use on the site. So it's usually around the edges. We have the eco garden, parking and access to the garden site. And we're aware that the elementary school parents and students also use the site for drop off and pickup. So from what we understand, they use the kind of gravel lot to the north there, and the students trek back and forth from the school across the field from there. And obviously, again, there's the existing recreational users to the fields and the track there. So we were very mindful of this when we were looking at the site to see how we can not only maintain and preserve this access, but to enhance it. In addition to the neighboring functions and uses around our site, we looked at it as implementing site zones around where we place the fire station. So when we looked at all the connectivity opportunities and pairing up like for like uses. So for example, in our concept, we paired up the fire station proper site closer to the hospital and more adjacent to 15th Street for the straight access to the highway. So from there, we looked at how can we integrate the project with the rest of the community, knowing that there's residential edges, there's the eco garden, there's recreational edges around. So we saw an opportunity to concentrate the fire hall at the intersection and beside the hospital, and then working outward from it, slowly decreasing the intensity of fire use, which allows the fire station and the fire hall and the fire department to function without interruption. And then the rest of the site bleeds into the rest of the edges of the community. So it becomes more of a community buffer between the fire station and the residential edges, a buffer that is connective and is not meant to separate, but it's how we program the elements in between that will connect the whole site together.
Sorry, Susanna.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that thinking. And this may be too granular, but in the preliminary design, there's a hose tower. And now we've moved the building quite close to the helipad at the hospital. Does that present an issue with NavCam guidance in terms of helicopter coming and going?
That's a really good question. And we did a lot of background look into that. For this particular stage of the project, unfortunately, we don't have a aeronautical report yet. So we used one from a neighboring, and it showed us, the, I guess, intended flight path towards the helipad. So we did locate the building proper outside of that flight path for now. Obviously, as the project goes ahead, we have to get all those studies done to ensure exactly where we can or cannot build. There's also the opportunity of asking NAVCAN to say, hey, do you think we can flip the flight path to come in from the north instead where it's open field? It's not out of the questions. We've had it done before. If there's a strong case made for it and it doesn't impact anything else, that would actually clear up the whole site, which makes a lot of sense. But that is something that will have to be looked at and applied for beyond the scope of this study right now.
Thank you.
So this is the proposed site layout. I know a very burning question is actually how much space does the fire station proper take? We are looking at 1.6 acres plus. So the request at the beginning of this whole exercise for 1.5 acres is we're pretty much on the mark here based on the requirements that we have. So the dashed outline there is the fire hall site. So that includes the fire hall itself, accesses, training, parking, and all the uses that come with the program that we have developed with the fire station, or the fire department, excuse me. So just to show that is the fire hall proper site. And then everything around it is that buffer that we were talking about of how do we bleed into the edges. So in terms of the overall site, this is the kind of final site, the final built out site, so to speak. However, we do understand that not everything is going to happen at once. Our main goal here is to get the fire hall up and running. So we looked at phasing the project, which is a strategy that I think will be able to address some of the current wants and needs, and also ensure that the fire station or fire hall is up and running for the community. So in phase one, we would anticipate that area where the fire hall is in the dashed orange area as phase one. That would get built on its own upfront, along with the green space and a gravel parking area and access to the south. So this is where we see to hopefully formalize some of those existing user accesses to be able to provide them with a very focused area on the site that is parking for the eco garden, is parking for the rest of the recreational fields, and also a formal area that is also a little bit closer to the school for parents to drop off their kids or to pick them up. So understanding, cost is a factor and a big consideration at this point. We're looking at this area to be graveled, so minimal construction, but providing the spaces there. And whatever that's greenfield right now will remain so that we don't incur additional costs. And the greenfield that we're showing right now is basically, if it's grass, we're going to leave it as is. And it can be like a multi-use amenity green space that the community and the fire hall can use at the moment. So with that in mind, we look at phase two. So we've kind of blurred out the phase one with the fire hall in function already. So somewhere down along the line, the city has agreements, can formulate agreements with the co-users, pick the co-user. So this goes back to the secondary stakeholders that I mentioned before. We use the parameters that they gave us. So 100 kid childcare. Again, these are not written in stone. These are just parameters we're using to space plan. So what we're space planning here with the kind of yellow rectangle there and the parking beside it is a multi-story building that can house 100 child daycare and up to 17 affordable housing units. So that was the parameters that were given to us. Obviously, if we tweak things, we might be able to get more if you decide to build a parkade and build higher. If we remove some of the NAVCAN restrictions, we might be able to have more units onto it. So again, it's in flux, but we have allocated space for what was a presented need at the beginning of the study. So with phase 2, the gravel areas will be upgraded, they'll be paved. We'll have added more connective paths from Fifth Avenue into the site and then connecting into the field as well. So there's a whole bunch of connective improvements that can be made throughout the project, whether it's in phase 1 or phase 2. And then the last image we have there, we're not calling it phase. These are future improvements on the site at whatever time. If the city has funds for it or is a different initiative, this area can be initiated sooner or later. So that's why we're just saying future improvements that are optional right now. So this is the area to the northeast corner where the existing washrooms and picnic structure is. So whether it be a refresh of those spaces or a complete new amenity use for that area, we've left the site to be able flexible for that. And it's at a corner where it's still adjacent to the existing recreational areas as well. So we took all of that and then we went to our cost consultant and say, hey, can we get a project budget from this? So what we looked at with the cost consultant, first and foremost was what are some of the potential funding streams that can help with the cost, or the capital cost of this project. So we also focused on just the fire hall component, again, because that was our mandate. So what we're presenting here today is fire hall focus. So, but I just wanted to note that we did look into future potential co-user funding as well. So that research has been done and it is all in our reports should it be required in the future when the co-users come on board. So we just want to ensure that everybody knows that we did the research for every user, not just the fire department, but for this portion of our study, we are focused on trying to find those streams and funding avenues for the fire hall itself. So we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first one we looked at is government and federal, provincial funding programs and grants. So these are from different agencies that are in BC, some are national and some are provincial. And then we looked at proceeds from potential city sale of city-owned properties. And then finally, this revenue generating opportunity piece is not so much for the capital investment, but more of an offset to the future operational requirements of the fire hall itself. So I've just listed the major ones that we have. We have a more detailed list in our report. Most of these are with the Canada Community Building Fund. What we do want to stress is that we did the research to identify these sources. We haven't made any applications. Some of these funding entities require a proposal to see what your project is. And the funding will be specific to what that project will eventually become. And there are some, I think Chief Morgan actually told me that one of them they already applied for and got. So that's a plus. So these are just opportunities that.
Sorry, Susanna. Councilor Ramnas, you had a question?
I do, Your Worship. Thanks for this. Just wondering, in all these streams here, what's the likelihood of success in many of these streams? Is it speculative at this point in time, or are there enough evidence to say that we can actually pursue one or many of these avenues?
When we looked at all of these, we picked the ones that were most feasible. And these were the ones that specifically said that infrastructure, including fire stations and police stations, are part of their consideration. So again, we haven't applied for it, so we don't know, but it is very specific to that infrastructure building programs. So these are the ones that we have listed because they seem the most feasible.
Further? Mr. Boranowski?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to supplement that, the first two, the Canada Community Building Fund, those are the gas tax funds. One of them is a sure thing as we receive it automatically every year. The other is the SPF or Strategic Priorities Fund. The last intake for that closed before the new agreements were renewed. Now those are renewed. We don't know the final shape of the Strategic Priorities Fund stream, but we'll get to see that soon. So it is a little bit speculative on that one. However, those are specific funds set aside, and the Community Works Fund is one that we receive that would, in all likelihood, form part of our funding mix for this project. Further down, when we look at the Emergency Operations Center equipment and training and the Volunteer Composite Fire Department equipment and training, those are smaller grants to the tune of approximately $40,000 a year to help us outfit with equipment necessary for the operation of the service. But we've had really good success, I think largely in part due to the quality of the application, the prep work the team has put in, but they've been highly successful.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. While we're paused here and talking about these different funding streams, I'm curious if in the Class D estimates here that we've got, if much work has been done as far as eco-friendliness of the building or sustainability for the building, in particular to access the Green Municipality Fund and that stream.
The Class D estimate is looking at, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but a very conservative scenario, which is typically based on very traditional building construction and methods. So it doesn't necessarily look into the whole sustainability part yet, because a Class D is very high level. So those get into the more granular, that gets sorted out maybe with a Class C, even Class B estimate. So at this point, it's trying to be very conservative to say that if we were built this and not have any of those in mind, which will never happen because we do have energy codes and sustainability codes that we have to adhere to. So in our mind, it would just get better from there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Councillor Romanes.
Thanks, Your Worship. Can just for the education of our audience here, could you please explain what Class D estimate is?
Yes.
Thank you. Good question.
So a Class D estimate is generated during conceptual design. It's also called an indicative cost estimate. So it gives the owner an idea, an overall budget of how something would cost. So in terms of percentage, I would say it's plus or minus 20 to 25%. So it is quite conservative, and it takes into certain escalations. For example, because we're just going off bubble diagrams right now, basically. So there's a lot of padding that gets on top of it. So that's what Class D does. It adds that padding, about 20%, give or take, to the project to capture those unknowns at this point.
Further?
From your experience, working on similar sized fire halls in other communities, have you ever seen your Class C or Class B estimates come below your Class D estimates, or this is kind of a floor and it only goes up from here?
It really depends on market. I'm not gonna lie, the last one we did pre-COVID, the market was very, very competitive. The actual tender that came in was about 15% lower than our class, but at that time it's called a Class A estimate because we have our constructed drawings and whatnot. So we were very surprised, but that was kind of a different time and place. So can it happen? Yes, but it's highly dependent on market. And as of right now, with the shortages that we're seeing with procurement and supply chain and inflation, I'm not quite sure we're going to be seeing those kind of competitive numbers anytime soon, unfortunately. But it has happened. We were caught off guard when it happened. We were surprised, pleasantly surprised, but at that time, the market was very, very competitive. And it was in the Alpine region as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Councillor Adia Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think Susanna somewhat answered. I wanted to clarify when you said to Councillor Hamilton, Class B and Class C will get better. I wondered, was that better in cost or more refined in scope?
It's more refined. And ideally, as we move up to Class A, those contingencies get smaller. So class B would be around 15%. B is coming down to about 5 to 8%, sometimes 10. And class A is pretty much you're ready to go to tender. And the only thing that would probably affect class A, which we saw on our previous project, was market.
Thank you. Carry on.
So item B is the leverage of city-owned assets. So I must put a disclaimer on this one at first. It's so it's not all of the city of Fernie's properties. These were an inventory list that was provided to us on properties that are deemed maybe more feasible to dispose at this time. We all know that the city doesn't have a lot of property to dispose of. So these are the ones that were deemed a little bit more feasible up front. And again, the estimate values are pulled from BC assessments. So if the city was to move forward on any of these, a formal appraisal will be needed. But this gives an overall idea of if all these properties were disposed of, about, let's say, $3.7 million can be attributed to help with the capital investment of the fire hall. Michael and Dustin did make us aware that the Ridgemont properties, they will require some site studies and site investigations to get them up to the point where they can be disposed. So there's different upfront costs to these various properties if they are to be disposed, but this provides kind of a snapshot and an overall estimate of what can help with the capital investment of the project. And finally, the items in category C, again, these are more to address the operational costs rather than the capital investment. So fire halls are traditionally funded by government funds, but there's also several ways that we've seen in the past where fire departments have creatively helped with their operating costs. It comes down, I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but training programs. So what we found with the training programs, this all comes down to how the fire station is programmed and built. If the fire station is programmed and built with adequate training facilities, these facilities can be leased out, and depending on different NFPA courses and how the firefighters train, each station will train with something different. And I've seen firefighters from High River in Alberta go down to Texas because they didn't have the special tower operations. It's because in Alberta, the major fire training centers are always booked, always full. So having, especially what we did in Kananaskis was, because it's remote, having the training on site allowed them to be within their fire station, within their jurisdiction while they train, instead of having to fly off to wherever and leaving their post. So it helps with obviously on-site training for your local firefighters, but it's also opportunity for those that, hey, you know, my tower is a little different than yours. We train a little bit differently. Maybe we can lease out and maybe we can teach a course here. So we've seen those classes take place, and it's interchangeable, and some of the fire departments are able to make some revenue from that. Another avenue we saw is facility rentals. So again, this goes back to the kind of the laying out of public accessible spaces within the fire stations. So maybe a community, a football team can book a night or to have a meeting on an off night for the fire training. So we've seen that happen. And something that I think is a little more local and specific to Fernie's service agreements with adjacent agencies. So Chief Morgan advised of the RDEK, there's a mutual, I'm not sure it's the mutual service agreement, but there's agreement for services. So those can be leveraged to help with offsetting operational costs. And then we've seen very creative community fundraising events. So there's charity runs, auctions, and fairs to raise funds for that. So it's not only just helping with operating stream revenue, but also as a community building activity as well. So it's just looking to diversify how we can fund the local fire stations. So I guess this is what everybody's waiting for, and you've already seen. So we already talked about what a Class D estimate. Thank you for the question. We deal with it all the time. We're certain that everybody knows, but that's not always the case. So again, based on our directive, we are costing just phase one. So that's the standalone fire hall itself. So we did sharpen our pencils a bit. We did a very rough order of magnitude cost at the beginning of the project, and that was even beyond Class D. That was just saying, hey, these are our needs, and they factored in all the contingencies. So we were able to bring down the footprint a bit from that initial program. And what we're seeing here, how it's split up, is phase one, again, is the fire hall building and site component. So again, that area in the orange dashed polygon, and then the remainder of the site that will be prepped for community public use. So those two items are costed separately, just to give a breakdown, so that there's a possibility if you just build the fire hall and the fire hall site and not do the rest, there's a savings about 350 grand at the end of the day for that, if we're looking at numbers. But we would suggest, as a community project and to ensure that the site is integrated, we would suggest doing both components of phase one at the same time. So the net construction cost is about 17.2 million. Then there's the escalation reserve there. So the escalation reserve is a contingency for those unknowns, the design changes, unknown site conditions, any remediation that's required. During our preliminary studies, we don't feel that there's issues with the site with that, but there's certain other things that might be unknown. So that reserve is there. So as we get to know and do all the specific studies for the site and get design going, this reserve will come down because all the unknowns are starting to be checked off. And that's when I say that the estimate itself gets honed in, it gets a little bit better, meaning it gets a little bit more precise. So when we look at the escalation reserve and the net construction, overall phase one, we're looking at $20.5 million. And I know, just going back to the councillor's previous question about how does this compare, since our last completed fire station pre-COVID, we've seen escalation in costs of upward to 30 to 35%. And this is actually in line with that for a fire station of the same scale. So unfortunately, when we're talking to our cost consultants, they do see the escalation going to happen as we go on. Things haven't really plateaued yet. There's still procurement and supply chain shortages with labor and trying to get materials. And what they also factored in is the remote location costs. So you're not in an urban center, so things and people will have to get trucked in. So there's a premium to that. So the project team did request that we look into so this cost, I must say, is based on the numbers and the market now. So the cost estimate is derived from numbers now.
Okay. Councilor Ramirez. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. Is that kind of a Fernie factor? Is that what you're trying to say?
Fernie factor, Kananaskis factor, anything that's kind of in the mountains.
Right.
You'll have to get specialized trades to come in. For example, in Kananaskis, they had to rent rooms in a nearby hotel for all the construction workers, right? You may not have the same problem here, but there is that factor. Yeah, that factors in with the proximity of where you are located to trades and materials.
Just to follow up your portion, yeah. Just looking at the escalation portion, which is about $2.9 million, and allowance, which is a total of about $5.5 million. Can you please explain what the difference is between allowance and escalation? I know it is there in the reading somewhere. I couldn't read that just yet, but if you can explain to me.
Yeah,
the differences are.
it's outlined a little bit more detailed in the cost report, like in our major report. Allowances are things like we haven't, in the bubble diagrams, we haven't shown walls. We haven't shown mechanical or like electrical equipment, right? So when they do a Class D estimate, it's a unit cost. So based on their knowledge of fire stations going up right now, what's the cost per square footage? So they apply that to the overall area that we get them, and they look at how things like how big the apparatus bays are and all that, and they factored all that in. But the allowances are things that we haven't drawn in, like stairs and walls and stuff like that. The escalation reserve is for the unknown things that typically, not always, but typically deal more with the site. Right. So for example, we had one project that nobody knew until we did a geotechnical report that we had to incur $1 million in piling. So things like that, like it may not happen, but because the concept design is so high level right now, we have to be responsible enough to include that in our contingency.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it's the ones you're looking for, but so,
The only reason I'm asking that, Your Worship, is the entire expansion and building is like $11.7 million. It's these other things which are like $6 million with a big unknown factor there. Just wanted to understand what's in, what's out.
Yeah,
Get a feel for this.
it's a fair question because as you've indicated, Susanna, there's a significant process of refinement, both in design and consequent costs as the estimates improve.
Yeah, I would direct you to the costing report. There is a breakdown of what's in there, and they do list out what their inflation, what they're assuming inflation would be. So maybe that would help. Like at the beginning of the report, they do list all their parameters that they're basing the costing on. If it still does not answer your question, I can definitely go back to them and ask them to break it down further. Okay. So although we're showing 20.5 right now, we're in Q3 now of 2024. So based on the team's recommendation, we did ask the cost consultant to say, hey, if there was a 12-month delay of starting the project, what would that escalation be? And again, not everybody has a crystal ball, but theirs is probably better than anybody else's at this point, based on market and what they're seeing the trends are. So if this was to start 12 months from now, which it might, because we are coming to Q4 of 2024, the potential cost of phase one itself would be upwards of $21.1 million. So that's an escalation of about $622,000. And for every year that it gets delayed, it won't be exactly this number, but it would be in that range of adding on to the project cost. So after the cost estimate came in, we did a quick study to see what can be some of the potential cost saving measures are. And we went back and forth with Chief Morgan on this as well. So one of the questions that were raised was, can this be a 3-bay fire station versus a 4? The answer is yes, but it will come with operational impacts. That would impact response times and operational efficiencies within the fire hall itself. So the overall cost savings of taking one bay out is about $1.3 million. The bay itself would be around 1.5, but from a 3-bay configuration, vehicles will be displaced. And those vehicles will require a kind of an outdoor shed, a tent structure. So that is about $200,000. So in taking out a bay, you will have to buy the tent. So that evens out to about 1.3 million in savings. Substantial amount, obviously, but it also, what we need to let everybody know, it does come with operational consequences for the fire department. And Chief Morgan might be able to speak to this a little bit more later, but currently from what we understand, FFESD has 4 main emergency primary deployment vehicles. And these 4 vehicles are to be parked at the front row. So if a call or emergency comes in, one of these 4 vehicles are typically deployed. So if on this diagram, so if you can imagine, we took out bay number 4, one of those primary deployment vehicles will have to be parked behind another one. So in the event that if that emergency happens, a firefighter will have to let's use bay 3, for example, will have to run to bay 3, pull the truck out, then another will have to come in and pull the other truck out. And then you'll have a truck sitting on the apron and there maybe safety issues because they just want to get out and answer their call. So in terms of response time, that is definitely a factor. I know FFSD has their own response time requirements, but typically we're looking around 2 minutes from the minute they get their call anywhere in the station that they run to the trucks and the trucks leave the site. So you imagine having to get in and out, back up the trucks, pull the trucks out, and then go. There is a response time impact, and it will also impact training spaces as well, because apparatus bays are also used for training. So if you remove that area, it's going to limit some of the training activities that they have.
Councillor Smith, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. Silly question perhaps, but I can't be the only one thinking it. Can they not have one backed in facing the other way? These are pull-through bays, are they not?
They are
Go the
pull-through
other way?
bays. The way the site is configured, they would have to pull out, go around, up, and then out again. So there's also time lost there. Can it be done? I'm going to have to defer to Chief Morgan on that.
Your worship, through the councillor. The key on the whole flow thing in the traffic way is the safety side of things. So if we've got, let's just say 20, 25 auxiliaries and career firefighters coming to the scene, to the hall, and to get onto these trucks, we don't want a vehicle coming out this way when they're coming in this way. So they'd be going against each other. So really how you want the fire hall is to be a flow. So they come in this way, get in their gear from this side, and then come out the front way. So you
Thank you,
never
Chief
have
Morgan.
cross. So for example, in this one, if you had a truck in the back facing the other way, which kind of makes sense, we've got the parking of the auxiliaries coming in and the career guys coming in. It goes out that way, then they're going to run into the people coming in.
Thank you, Chief Morgan.
Good question. So yeah, this is probably the biggest cost saving measures that we see. But along with it comes very, very big impacts to operations as well. So we just want to make sure that that consideration is known if this was being explored. Some of the other things that we looked at that happens that deployed on some of our other projects is, especially if a project is phased, if there's certain phases that can be done all under one contractor, there's cost savings there because you don't have, they'll mobilize once. You have one contractor site, they're not running over each other's toes. So that's why I think my comment from before about phase 1, if all of it can be done at the same time, that would be ideal under one contractor and also one consultant team. So that saves you a bit of in fees as well. One thing that we're seeing more frequently is a construction manager being brought on the project at the get-go. They work closely with the design team and the designers to look at cost saving measures through design. So bringing ideas about, hey, maybe a different structure. You know, right now we're looking at a couple of prefab fire stations that we've never done before. They come with their own complexities as well, but sometimes they work for certain areas. So different structures, and a construction manager will be able to give you a little bit more insight on those different things. They have real-time industry market numbers to work with. Another one that we're looking at as alternate forms of project delivery. We're quite frequently seeing some of the ones in Alberta being design build at the moment. So again, having that contractor presence at the beginning where they are looking at the cost from the get-go.
Sorry, Susanna. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Just thinking about the prefab notions, are those instances also being post-disaster building code levels, or are they kind of more ancillary, auxiliary?
I was waiting for that one.
halls that don't need to achieve that?
So the ones that we're looking at prefab right now, it's a little bit of new territory for us because the authority having jurisdiction, so that municipality themselves have requested non-post-disaster designation. Now, the post-disaster variance or granted is dictated by the authority having jurisdiction, and their own authority having jurisdiction is on board and says they provided a letter and say, yes, this fire station does not have to be post-disaster. We get that in writing because they say they have other means of dealing with that issue. Overall, we have not been able to, other than the jurisdictions themselves asking for it, we have not been able to get away from the post-disaster. And there are certain designed strategies that we can work with prefab or pre-engineering buildings. In the end, it hasn't been done enough for us to see what the actual cost impacts and efficiencies are yet, but it all comes down to contractor knowledge as well. If they've dealt with it, if they've dealt with building this type of facility and understanding how prefab can work in a post-disaster scenario, that is key. And there's not many of them right now. Okay. And going to the post-disaster requirement point there, right now, the way we've laid everything out and how we've prioritized essential, required, and optional elements, everything in the fire hall right now is considered considered to have post-disaster requirements, because all areas of the fire hall that house emergency personnel, emergency equipment, and emergency services, so redundant backup power, anything that helps the fire hall remain operational in the event of disaster, are all required to be post-disaster requirements. However, in the future, if you want to add to the building, maybe a community component as a co-users, then we would look at a different strategy for maybe those components don't have to be post-disaster. So looking at cost savings of how you strategically place those elements in the future. One thing that we say a lot, and I don't know if it can be done because schedules basically have a mind of their own, but if we can schedule construction for foundation work to start before the first frost, that will save you a lot on heating and hoarding cost. So that is just good scheduling by the contractor and the project team. And this one may be a little bit more difficult, but using locally available and source materials is a big factor, especially with that Fernie construction factor, that if we can source things that are more local, that will cut down on transportation and delivery costs. So I have talked a lot. Thank you for being patient with me. Oh, we've been asking questions, but anybody have any other questions?
Councillor Ramnes.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. Just this might be an odd question, and I should ask this anyway. What happens if these are not post-disaster standards? Like, what's the consequence? And is there a difference in costs between what we have in front of us versus a non-post-disaster level design?
Post-disaster, it's a premium for sure. On all the fire stations I've done, except for the ones that have been requested by the municipality to not be, because they have other things in place, we have not been able to negotiate for it not to be. And I think from a safety point of view, just for the community itself, because fire halls, police stations, hospitals, they are those agencies that have to remain operational after a disaster event. So I'm just use earthquake, for example. Like if it was like one of the post-disaster requirements is seismically designed structure. If that was not there, and let's say the apparatus bay caved in on your apparatus trucks, there's a fire, how are you going to get out? Or your firefighters are pinned down by a structure. So there's a very, very valid and big safety reason for the post-disaster requirement. And for the most part, it's with the authorities having jurisdiction, it's non-negotiable. So it's more, the ones that we're working on are in more rural communities where they say that these fire stations aren't manned 24/7 and that they can store trucks somewhere else as well. That's how they got around it themselves. But for a city of this size, I would highly not recommend it.
Thank you. Mr. Baranowski.
Thank you, Your Worship. We undertook a pretty considerable local review of this consideration, both with our building official and with a local architect as a secondary consultant, specifically on the question of post-disaster buildings. And generally, exemption is applied by the local authority or requested and pursued by the local authority through the building official and the municipality or regional district, who's the local authority, when there is a primary post-disaster emergency response facility already in place. And then your secondary, your tertiary, other facilities are much more easily exempt from that. The general recommendation was to consider your primary emergency response facility, and this would be our only primary emergency response facility, to be mandatory in terms of pursuing post-disaster readiness. But that's not to say that other municipalities don't have emergency management plans that specify which buildings are used to provide those essential services after an emergency and therefore do need to meet that readiness. This one, as it would house fire, have EOC, need to be providing post-disaster services, is likely not able to be exempt from that, though. Essentially, it's a very long review of a building application at the end of the day that would prove that out, and likely an attempt at an appeal through the BCAB, the Building Code Appeal Board, if we were to pursue that.
Other questions from council? Councillor Nixon.
Okay, thank you, Worship. In our staff report, I think I was just going back to our original staff report. Under the implication, it reads increased insurance costs. I know that this is because of our fire underwriters survey, but I'm not sure if everyone in the community knows about this. And can we talk a little bit for the benefits of the people in the audience and maybe some people watching tonight who are not watching the Trump debate? Can we get a summary of the fire underwriter score, please?
Your Worship, the Councillor. So basically how fire underwriters works, it's fire underwriters a survey, and they basically dictate the classification of your fire suppression abilities in your community. And so what they do is they have two gradings. One is a protective, it's a commercial one where it's a protective or public fire protection classification, and that's a rating from 1 to 10. And basically you're looking at hospitals, schools, multifamily, commercial, industrial. And so they give you a rating in your town of how you can take care of those fires with what you've got, whether it's manpower, training, equipment, and so on. Fernie is rated at a 5 right now, and so probably a big reason for that is resource-wise. If it was a major industrial fire or something, we don't have that many resources, so we'd have to rely on others, as opposed to a city where they might be a 2 or a 3 because they can pull in like other stations to come and help with the like that industrial fire. What we have also then is a dwelling protection grading, which is a grading that looks at single family dwellings, which is most of Fernie. And that grading is a 1 to 5. And we're rated at a 2, which is a really good, that's pretty much as good as you get. And so when you're looking at how they come about that grading is they look at the things in your town, like the fire department, the type of equipment you've got, whether you do all the testing annually, which is the pump testing, ladder testing, making sure you're doing all the fit tests, And then they look at the component of education, the training you've got, whether you're following sort of the basic educational needs as far as what a firefighter should be, as far as the training side of things. So that takes about 40% of the grading system. And then you go down to the water supply, so hydrants in your city, the distribution, whether they're tested annually, which the city of Fernie does. So we get that report every year. And then 20% of that is fire prevention. So inspections, commercial inspections, which we do yearly. And the public education side of things. So the school programming, public education, teaching fire extinguisher training, evacuation drills, and so on. And then the last one is the emergency communication. So how we communicate with each other on an emergency scene, how alarms go in your community, and how you respond to alarms with the resources that you have. So basically then what happens is your broker or your writer will call the underwriters and say, what's our grading? And then so they give the grading and then they ask specific questions like how far you are from a hydrant, are you in 300 feet? Are you within 8 kilometers of the fire hall? Are you within a certain response time? And then once they get all that data, then they can assign you a grading. And so at any time they could come in and say, okay, we're going to do an assessment on the city. Let's see what you got. So they'll look at our training records. They'll look at all the testing, certificates, educational certificates, and so on. So yeah, at the end of the day, they'll end up coming in auditing. So when they do, we don't know, but they could come in at any time. You also then have some time to get things sorted. And so you won't lose your grading right away, but if things don't change, then obviously you lose your grading. The amount that your extra insurance would be from a downgrade, say from a 2 to a 3, we don't know. So I've tried to find out from both FUS and from brokers, and there's just too many variables there. So it's really hard to say. It depends on if you are within 300 or how close your building is to another building and so on. So they take so many variables in there that at the end of the day, just anecdotally, I'm hearing that people are paying once they've found out they were outside of 8, which is one of the criteria, 8 kilometers, they had to pay an extra $2,000 to $3,000 depending on the person. So yeah, it's really hard to say what the difference would be.
Other questions? Councillor Roddy Kelly.
I apologize, but could we just go back over the, I'm going to call it the Fernie Thatcher or the Alpine Build Premium again a little bit, Susanna? Can you just kind of flesh out maybe what that does add to our cost versus, say, building in Kelowna?
Right. So I'm just going to use Kananaskis because that was our last one. The premium, I would say, is probably in the upwards of 15%. It's just that getting the trades there. It wouldn't be as high for Fernie because you do have lodging, whereas in Kananaskis, they were actually staying in a really nice delta down the mountain road. So that comes with a premium. Some of the trades actually drove from Calgary into Kananaskis every day. So it's time, it's delivery costs. Major manufacturer centers are typically closer to the urban centers. So let's say if you're pouring concrete, for example, or ordering CMU block, if the factory is further away from where your site is, there's obviously additional transportation and delivery cost. So it comes down to material and availability of trades. If you have a healthy industry and their trades are here anyway, that might offset it, but typically in the Alpine region, it's harder to come by. And that's why resourcing, one of the exercises we did do with Kananaskis is to actually find out where all the plants were in relationship to the site. And we selected materials that were more cost and sustainably responsible in that way to try to mitigate some of that factor.
Thank you. Other questions? Oh, Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Bishop. I had one question after reading through a whole bunch of stuff and looking at financial opportunities and grants and so on. Can you explain what sustainable infrastructure is? Because after reading a lot, I have no idea.
Oh, how much time do you, no, that is a very wide net question, but pertaining to building, it can be sustainable design, sustainable construction. Sustainable design, there's certain measures and construction principles we should, as designers, we should be doing anyway. And the new codes that are out are more stringent, so it pushes us to be more sustainable in terms of selecting materials that are more sustainably resourced, looking at more sustainable operating systems within a building. So for example, if we can passively heat or cool a building and not rely on the grid for AC and heating, that is part of a design strategy that can be part of sustainable design. In terms of sustainable construction, again, sourcing and localizing, you know, a carbon footprint of where you bring in materials. So it's not only in the construction or the capital investment of a building, but it more has to do with the operational and maintenance aspect of it. So how do you bring down energy costs? So it's not just, you know, the window coverings can be a big sustainable measure as well. Solar shades, and also looking how you source the energy to run your building. Is it wind energy, like geothermals? Like we've looked at that as well. Solar, a lot of the fire stations we're doing have a solar requirement from the municipality right now. So we are implementing solar design. There's solar panels actually in your walls that you can use as well. So it's not necessarily just the ones on the roof. And just siting the building, whether it's east, west, trying to gain those passive, more like not big dollars equipment strategies as well. So sustainable design and construction is a big topic, but in this scope of what we're doing, it comes down to design strategies and also being socially responsible of how you maintain the building in the future.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I guess my part of where this question was going was, while there are significant costs in paying for the building and, you know, servicing the debt on it and those types of things, lowering the operational costs of the building can contribute greatly to the ability to be able to afford the building over the long term, because then you don't have high operational costs on top of debt servicing and so on. And I guess what I was wondering is, within the earlier discussion that Councilor Ramadas had asked a question about with regards to allowances and extras. So these are sort of the known unknowns versus the unknown unknowns. At what point do we reach the decision making in the design and so on where we can choose sustainable or not sustainable and take those, apply those numbers to one of those two categories? Is that way down the line, or does that happen sooner? Or?
I would say it can happen like in conjunction with schematic design. So what we've actually done for, again, this is with Kananaskis. Alberta Infrastructure was our client, and they had all these deeper greening measures, what they call deeper greening measures, sustainability measures that they wanted to implement. For example, solar panels, different resilient clips to clip cladding on so that your building, so your wall assembly doesn't lose too much heat through thermal breaks and whatnot. And they were really curious to say, okay, all these things are a premium. There's a capital investment to them. What is the rate of return on that? And that's where you find that balance of when does, you know, is the rate of return plausible for your capital investment? And we actually worked with a sustainability consultant and our costing agent to provide them with a deeper greening report. So we actually, at schematic design, we said, okay, let's implement all these measures in there. And the sustainability consultant would create an energy model, basically. So they would run a simulation, winter, summer, you have this many windows, you have, you're powered by solar, all those, like the wish list a la carte of things. And at the end of the day, we can see that certain things had a rate of return of 100 years with a huge capital investment that you will not be able to get back. So what we implement, instead of going for LEED certification or other certification, we built a project-specific sustainability matrix for our project that looked at this report and said, okay, the client said, I'm willing to pay for this capital investment for these clips for our walls because the rate of return is 25 years and it will lower our operating costs and our footprint by X. So that can be done at the onset during schematic design. Once you have a kind of idea what your building kind of looks like, they can create an energy model and run simulations to see what your rate of return on all these different things. And it turned out to be something that this report they've used on subsequent projects because they just didn't want to buy LEED points, so to speak. Did it actually, was it project appropriate? And that's what I think, if you're thinking about where to start that exercise and how to determine whether you want to go sustainable or not, is to do that cost of return, the rate of return exercise on the preliminary design.
Councillor Ramirez?
To be clear, Your Worship, it's again a very small portion of our overall capital expenditure. It's like $500,000. Really, the killer here is concrete, moisture protection, HVAC, and electrical. Like those are your big ticket items here. That is really raising the costs here.
Yeah.
So again, a follow-up question to that: in these major categories here, what's the level of confidence? Is there a way to kind of give a little bit of color of how much some of these are controllable? Like what can we do with, I don't know, the electrical, with HVAC? Like is there some feel for that?
These, again, being a Class D, they're unit rates applied to an overall area. So in order to dissect that even more, you have to have a little bit more of a concrete schematic design. And having an engineer team choose, this is the structure we're going to use, or these are the systems that we're going to use, and that will impact that. Because right now, those unit rates are based on kind of an industry standard, what a typical fire station is being built currently. And typically post-disaster requirements is CMU block and concrete, typically. So that's what the unit rate is reflecting. So once it gets into a little bit more schematic design, the Class C estimate, which is about, again, plus minus 15, 10%, around there, the consulting team, along with the client, would have selected these systems that can further tone down or be a little bit precise with those numbers.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. Just turning my attention to numbers for a minute. In the staff report, there's some, actually, I'm not sure if it's in the staff report, so I'm not sure what page I'm on here right now, but there's some comments in there with regards to the MFA borrowing rate at 3.91% and the loan amount and what the annual payment is and all that sort of thing. What I was wondering is, considering we've been seeing steady decreases in borrowing rates, I'm curious about what the effective timing on this particular construction would make as far as what the annual payment and tax increase and so on be. If, as was suggested, we're heading into fourth quarter here and we're probably not looking at construction for another year. What point, I guess, at what point are we, assuming we are to move forward with this and everybody supports it and we apply for the MFA and we approve for the borrowing that we need and all that stuff, when does that happen? So is that 3 months from now? Is it 1 year from now? And so at what point would we actually know what the real number is that we'd be responsible for? I don't know if that's a Mr. Burdett question or.
It looks like it. Mr. Burdett.
Thank you, Councillor McIsaac. Yeah, when the report was published, the rate was 3.91%. It's updating all the time. Today I checked, it's down to 3.82. So if it decreases by 0.1 a week, should be free. Yeah, but so I mean that 0.1%. I think the staff report said if we were to borrow all 20 million, that would equate to a 12.16% tax increase. But that 0.1% interest rate drop drops that 12.16 down to 12.03, which for the average single family home in Fernie is about $321. And then at the start of the project, that's right, yeah. So, and then the MFA offers 2 borrowing openings per year, one in the spring, one in the fall. So they just announced their spring borrowing release, I think it was this week, which then triggers all the process of us, getting a Class A estimate and then there's a approval at the regional district level before we can apply to MFA. So I guess to answer your question about when it gets locked in, it would either be the spring or the fall of whatever year that we. So, I mean, in terms of where interest rates are going at the moment, it's trending in our favor, but remains anybody's guess long term. Does that help answer your question? Yes. And I also wanted, while I have the mic, the staff report does say 12% increase, but it's worth noting that the city of Fernie only gets half of the typical tax bill. So a 12% city of Fernie tax increase really only relates to a 6% increase on your overall tax bill. So because half our money goes to the regional district, goes to the school district, and so on. So if your tax bill is $5,000, a 12% city of Fernie increase doesn't mean $600, it means $300.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Following kind of that train of thought, with MFA financing, is there the opportunity at some point in the middle of the term to refinance? As in, we borrow the money a year's time, 2 years' time, interest rates are down at 1% again or less. Can we refinance it at the lower rate?
Thanks, Councillor Hamilton. Not at our discretion. Typically, when they loan over 30 years, their first term is for 10 years, which is what the 3.82% is. It's their current 10-year rate. And then at that point, you renew the loan every 5 years. But you can't just decide to do it if interest rates drop.
Councillor Adia Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Councillor McIsaac, for that good question, because I did notice when I was researching the West Kelowna project that one of their strategies was the timing of their borrowing, which was going to save taxpayers considerable money. And I actually wanted to ask, if I can, about the timing of our agreement with the RDEK for what they are giving us for fire protection. There was a comment made from the gallery tonight that I thought was quite pertinent. My understanding is we're getting about $450 now.
Thank you, Councillor Adia Kelly. The current agreement expires at the end of 2025. And you're right, Mr. Josh, I did have his last name, but apologies, Mr. Josh. Did have a great question, and it's in the staff report. So the current agreement says we get $450,000, and that agreement dates back prior to when all of this inflation happened. And so, the amount being in there is a little unfortunate in terms of the inflation that we're experiencing, but it does say that it's tied to the notional cost of one bay, which, as Ms. Pon said earlier, is around 1.3 million. So we have started discussions with our counterparts over there in terms of getting that agreement updated to a more modern number. And then there was also the question about what we get from the regional district with respect to just our annual costs. And 2024 budget, we get 417,000 from them, which is roughly 22% of our operating budget for the fire department. And that's that's meant to help cover off the services for the ski hill.
And is that number reflective of the value of the built environment there? Like so is it
Yeah,
based on
exactly.
assessed value?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's based on. There's
Thank
a
you.
formula in the agreement.
Mr. Boranowski.
Thank you, Your Worship. One comment, it is based off assessed value, but there was an escalation cap put in and some disagreement between the RD and the city of Fernie on when that escalation should come into effect. And
I can imagine.
it does cap the escalation in that agreement, regardless of how much new development we are seeing. And if you look at what is happening in the electoral area at the resort, potential for the Galloway lands, there is significant new assessed value and significant new obligations for service coming online. I think the nature of our service agreement is fundamentally different than it was at the very beginning of a pandemic when this was first executed. And so I think there's rationale to discuss both ongoing operating and the capital costs it contemplates.
Thank you. Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. Good questions all around. On that note, I think it should be noted that we aren't obligated, and I say we, I mean we, the city of Fernie taxpayer, aren't obligated to provide cheap fire services for other people. And we should keep that in mind moving forward on this.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. My question was also with relation to the RD and the ski hill, but not just on the assessed value in that relationship, but does that like 22% roughly correlate to the volume of responses that we're responding to?
Yeah, I mean, Brent could probably answer this better, but it seems call volume wise that it's covering what they're paying operationally.
Councillor Arnie Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. I thought I had read somewhere, this might be a question for you, CAO, about a capital contribution that the RD was considering as well to a new fire build, or did I not read that somewhere?
Your Worship and Council, it is the 427 is the operating funding annually. The escalation there is capped. The 450 was the one-time contribution to the construction of a new fire hall contemplated in this agreement. However, as noted, the agreement's expiring and it was based on the cost of one bay or the notional cost of a bay. And we know that that's pretty out of whack now. So that needs to be examined. There is also the Rural Fire Services Agreement, which itself also contributes also contemplates a contribution to a new fire hall. However, I don't think we can double dip just because there are two agreements, and the newer agreement is probably the one we need to renegotiate.
Councillor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just doing a high-level managerial math here. It's not perfect, but say 22% on operating expense. Can you slap the same 22% to capital also? Or I know it's single bay, 3 bays, could be $1.5 million, but is $1.5 million the right number? Could it be 22% of $20 million? You know what I mean? Like.
Thanks, Councillor Ramirez. I understand your question. In the agreement, the fire hall contribution is defined as the 450. There is another formula for other capital purchases. For example, the ladder truck that we just ordered for delivery in 2026. And that formula was applied to how we're going to fund that truck, which was part of the council report at that time. But it's still capped by an inflationary rate, which recently we've eclipsed that. So, you know, that will definitely be part of my mandate when we renew the agreement to have something a little more fair, especially when we have just gone through this inflationary period. You can certainly ask for that, yeah. But as the current agreement stands, it doesn't match up that way.
Mr. Boranowski, just referencing your staff report, page 7, it talks about DCCs and they're newly available to spend on fire hall infrastructure. So can you kind of contextualize that for us? And what does it take to get a fire hall in the DCC spend list, as it were?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not extremely excited about the prospect or extremely confident in the prospect. But as of 2023, fire halls and other emergency facilities can be added to DCC bylaw updates. They have to be added in the same way as any other utility or asset class, which would be undertaking your plan on what new facilities and what new investment in capital is required to support growth.
Mhm.
And then the portion of that that would be required to support new growth could then be added to a DCC bylaw. It is a new section in a DCC bylaw, so it would be considered a major update and require inspector approval from the inspector for municipalities. It also could not apply to the cost to replacing or maintaining a facility that was required to support existing population. DCCs have to be new infrastructure for growth. So a small portion of a fire hall that would be built after the major DCC update to support just the new growth could then be added to a fee for that new growth. And then that it's small, but it could be meaningful in terms of a portion of our repayment over time. As new growth happens, we can then use those DCCs to pay for the portion that we are building. But certainly it's not the amount of a new fire hall and other equipment that would be required to support our existing population. So it's not a full hall that could be added to a DCC bylaw.
Thank you. Councilor McIsaac.
Thank you, Your Worship. And related to that, though, I'm curious, what percentage of the current cost, anticipated cost of the fire hall is related to anticipated growth in the community? So some of the costs that are proposed are anticipatory. We're assuming we want this to manage. So would those anticipated growth costs be eligible?
Your Worship and Council, from my understanding in reading through the updated DCC guides in prep for the meeting, yes, the portion required for anticipated growth could then be attributed to growth, and as that growth happened, recuperated by DCCs, and then those DCCs used to pay. However, that DCC bylaw needs to be adopted, inspected, and approved before the build for it then to be eligible.
Councilor Shoesmith.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. A lot of people warned me fire halls were going to be really difficult, and I didn't know what they were talking about, but here we are. So this is a pretty important thing. This is going to kind of define our 4 years here, but this is also going to affect the status of the town and the costs borne by the city ongoing for some decades into the future. And this isn't a new issue either. This, I believe in the last term, there were plans for a fire hall at 902 drawn up, and here we are again. And so I've got to ask, what happens if this fails referendum, or if we vote this down? What happens in those cases? Where do we go?
I'll ask the chief to speak to the real implications on the fire hall service itself. Likely one of the first things triggered, however, will be the need to bring the old operations facility and the new operations facility up to a post-disaster standard if we're going to operate out of there over the long term. There's no real opportunity for a temporary operation in the long term out of a non-disaster ready facility. So we're looking at significant capital investments required to operate out of where we are temporarily housed right now. There's some appreciation that we're moving meaningfully towards a real replacement permanent fire hall, which has allowed us to get to where we are. And frankly, I think that if we're not proceeding towards building a new hall, we're going to be proceeding towards needing to secure funds and invest in significant and significantly disruptive renovations to our old and new operations facility to continue operating over there over the medium term. I'd ask the chief to speak to the real operating implications, as that's his area.
Your Worship, if this fire hall doesn't get built, there's tons of implications. So I brought a month ago sort of what was happening with us right now. and the needs that we have. Right now, we're already over the FUS NFPA response times for calls. We are, if I look at our last 4 fires, on average, they were 11 minutes and 30 seconds, and we really should be between 9 and 10 minutes. We've been blocked by trains on 2 of those fires. One of the other nuances of not having a fire hall is, and we're seeing it roll out as we speak for 2 years now, a place where people don't feel proud to work in. It's hard to keep the auxiliaries. We've lost 16 since we've moved in there in 22. We've gained some back, but like I said, we've got 12 that are less than a year's experience out of the 20. It's demoralizing for the firefighters. It's an essential service. These firefighters put their lives on the line 24/7 if they're needed. And we are stuck in thankfully, a place that's not as toxic as it was before. So thank you for moving us, but it's not sustainable. We have our quarters, we have our offices, we have all of that stuff in an old lunchroom and admin, public works admin area. We're going from there to an ATCO trailer to put on our gear. We're going from there into bays that aren't really fit for fire trucks, cold bays in the public works building. We're then traveling on these the roads that aren't meant to be, having $1 million, $2 million trucks go down dirt roads at higher speeds than most vehicles. So at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is the health and safety of our firefighters, and mostly mental at this point. And it is really frustrating. And I'm going on tangent here, but to see social media and the things that are happening on social media and the misfacts, the truths, and if this referendum doesn't pass, it doesn't pass, and we'll try it again. But at the end of the day, we've been passing this off for so long that we just can't keep doing it. We're going to lose a lot of our firefighters. And then, we've got the greatest team of firefighters that I've been with, career-wise. They train our auxiliary firefighters to the nth degree. They work really hard. They do all their jobs that they're supposed to do. They toe the line. They don't get involved in the social media aspect of things. And it's tough on them. It's tough on them mentally. And it's time for us to pay the piper and get a fire hall. And I understand it's a lot of money. $20 million is a lot of money. But in a year from now, 21 million, 22 million, at some point it has to be done. And so I feel for people that are on fixed incomes that have to increase their taxes, and it's really, really tough. But at the end of the day, it's an essential service, and we need to, our firefighters are safer now because of where we're at. But I feel like the community isn't as safe as they were before because of our response times and the fact that we're losing experienced firefighters that can do the job. So it's more an emotional answer to you, but I'm like quite frustrated with the fact that this can't move forward. And the one thing that I am proud of is that both the city workers and council have been pushing forward on this. And, we've got the study done from Arcadis, put a lot of hours and time into this. Our leadership team has been like half their time is spent on this when they are full jobs to do. So that's my answer.
Thank you for that, Chief. And I don't see that as an emotional answer at all. It's a very practical answer. And I've said at this table more than once, this has been put off since 1979, when the fire department was moved into a repurposed tire shop. And our job is to bring the community along with us to understand we need a needs-based fire hall that meets the needs of our fire department and furthermore meets the needs of the community. And that's, you know, the talk in the community will be the talk in the community. We need to bring people along with us to understand this is a need, and it is entirely irresponsible to kick it down the road any further. I don't think that's fair to the firefighters in this community, as you say, who put their life on the line. It's not fair to the residents of this community. There's a lot of noise, but we need to ignore the noise and be sure people understand the need. And I think that's our primary goal here. And I'm not going to sit in this seat and kick it down the road any further. If it fails, we'll try again. I think that's exactly right. We're going to keep at this until we have an answer. And the answer in my mind is a needs-based fire hall for this community that meets the needs of the firefighters and meets the needs of the community. It's, you know, we can't live in the past forever. It's ridiculous. I don't see pushing this any further along. I think we need to advance it as effectively as we can with the best and most open communication that we can. Councillor Audie Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. Could I redirect this back to funding strategies? Sorry. I noticed when I was doing a little bit of research on current fire hall builds, Kelowna is building one, 4 bays, a CBA, workshop, living quarters, yada, yada, yada. One of the things that they used to fund it was the Growing Communities Fund and also park development cost charges. Would those be anything we could leverage?
The hall, so when we talk about 4 bays, it's 4 single bays, so essentially 2 bays, and they're back-in bays. There are some nuances. As part of that project, they also purchased a house to house their administrative offices. So you don't see a lot of things included in the budget for the Kelowna Fire Hall because it's one of 4, or the West Kelowna, it's one of 4. They separately and in a separate budget purchased a house for their admin facilities, and they have 4 people on staff so they can have a spotter and back-in vehicles. However, parks, DCCs, the inclusion of some recreation amenities, which they had in their DCC bylaw as amenities, allowed them to fund portions of that community benefit from those. But certainly those are all pieces that we can look at. I'd have to look specifically at how they applied the community building fund and what they got out of it. I would imagine they're using their gas tax reserves, which is what that portion of that is.
Mr. Burdett.
Thank you. Just to build on that, Councillor Audie Kelly, you said Growing Communities Fund, which we did receive a payment for, and we've been holding for this, well, not this project, but a big future project. So that will certainly factor into the overall funding strategy for sure. And you know, the staff report did have all these different levels of borrowing, the 20 million, the 17.5. Obviously, nobody here wants to borrow all 20 million. Those numbers are just purely for context.
Further,
Your Worship, if you don't mind, could you, let's say we had to only borrow 15, with the change in the lowering of the interest rate, could you give us an idea of what that would be for a taxpayer?
Yes. So the staff report says 15 million is 9.12%. At today's interest rate, it's 9.02, which equates to $241 for the average single family home annually. And sorry, what was the second part of that question? Was length? It would still be a 30-year loan. Yeah, that's basically all long-term borrowing with the MFA is 30 years. And then, you know, another number, that's an annual payment of just under 850,000, which equates to that 9% of tax.
Thanks, Your Worship. And we can renegotiate after 10 years. So conceivably, if interest rates went down, that number could drop. That's crystal balling it. I get that, but
Yeah, so in that case, if our annual payment goes down after 10 years, then, that would be presented as part of that year's budget. We've saved this money on debt repayment. Does council want to factor that into lowering whatever the tax increase is that year, or does council want to put it to reserve, or, yeah, I mean, that's down the road, but.
Councillor Ramirez?
Sorry, Your Worship, just want to ask the basic question. If it's say $250, $250 is locked in for the next 30 years, assuming the interest rates don't change. Am I getting this right?
That's correct. Yeah. $250 per year for 30 years. I also read somewhere, we do have that short-term loan payment of 600,000, which was used to finish funding the ops facility. And that 2025 is our last year for that loan payment. So that, that is an option to be applied to any future loan for this, but as part of presenting that option, I'll remind council that when we entered into that loan in 2019, it was made clear that we were borrowing from our existing reserve contributions in order to fund that loan. So, there's definitely risk to using that towards this loan.
Thank you. And that was your question, Councillor McFadden?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. That's almost identical to what I was going to ask the question of, is because I was thinking about it in terms of the $600,000 loan payment that's coming out every year is already factored into the current budget. And so having that $600,000 wouldn't be an increase in taxes to incorporate it. But if it's just coming out of reserves and not part of the increase, then that's not going to apply. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just again, I think more from the staff report than there was investigation, and maybe it was from Susanna's as well, but for potential revenue streams for the fire hall. And it's just a general question. I'm not suggesting we steal this if it pays money, but the College of the Rockies has the fire training program, and I think they run it out of Creston currently. Chief, does that generate money for the fire hall, or is that more of an in-kind kind of training exercise for all involved?
So it's a little bit of both. With the work experience program, they can utilize them on calls, which is really good. And so Jaffrey area, they're doing the same thing, and they're utilizing them in the summertime when they got deployments, and it's making the RDK a lot of money with that program. As far as the college side of things, I don't know if it's a moneymaker or not. It moved from Kimberley to Creston, and so they're running that through their fire department.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. And maybe this is a question to Chief Morgan here. Just continuing with the train of thought that Councillor Shoesmith had about this. And I'll be honest here, my concern is the referendum. And there is, again, this is just me. I have a feeling that this will be a tough vote for our citizens. Let's say we lose the referendum, and you said we'll have to go back, work a different path. Do we know what that different path would look like?
Your Worship, the Councillor. I really don't know. Honestly, I think it's a matter of motivating our staff to continue to do what they need to do. And hopefully we readjust and try a different method of trying to pass a referendum. All I can say is, as the leader of the group, is I could just keep them, try to be motivated and continue to do the good job that they're doing. If they're stuck in there for another 3, 4, 5 years like it has been, I really don't know. But what we definitely will suffer from is auxiliary firefighters, and we rely heavily on them. You know, our career firefighters, as you know, make a decent wage. Our auxiliaries don't, and they've got lives, they've got families, they've got other priorities. And my fear is that we're going to lose a lot of them, and we cannot survive without the auxiliary firefighters. Like, we just cannot. You know, we're supposed to have 15 firefighters at a fire. We've averaged 13 in the last 4 major fires. Of those, 9 or 10 of the career, and we have 10, which is two administration chiefs and 8 career. 9 or 10 of that average of 13 has been the career firefighters. So we're looking at, you know, one of the fires was an anomaly. It was an evening time. There was a little bit more time to get to it and so on. So we called on Hosmer to help us on mutual aid. So we had quite a few more auxiliaries on that. But the last fire we had, I'll tell you exactly, but it was 3 or 4 auxiliary firefighters. And like I say, we're getting to the point where we're losing our experienced auxiliary firefighters that are trained to pretty much the level that a career are. And so I guess the answer to the question is we just keep trying to get more firefighters and keep training them. That's, you know, that's all we can do at this point.
Mr. Burden.
Thank you. I wanted to offer a math-based perspective that I was thinking about. If the referendum fails, let's say we borrow, $15 million, that's going to cost the average Fernie taxpayer $241 a year. We know that number. If the referendum fails, then we're at risk of our FUS rating going down, as Chief Morgan already explained. We don't really know how to quantify that because there's so many variables. But, there are examples of people falling outside of that 8-kilometer range where their insurance costs have gone up $3,000. That's a lot more than $241 per year. And then that money, instead of going into this community and building a fire hall, goes to insurance companies. And at least with the referendum passing and building a fire hall, at least we have a fire hall and a fire department to protect our homes if they should need it. That's helped me to look at it from that perspective.
Okay.
Is it possible to quantify that? Do we know how many people are outside of the 8-kilometer range?
Well, I mean, the 8-kilometer range was just the one example. I don't know. We don't know how to quantify the downgrade in FUS rating, but it's certainly a risk.
Councilor Hamilton.
Thank you. When I was kind of prepping for this meeting and looking at what was happening in Kelowna, looking at the price tag there, and looking at this Class D estimate, the biggest number that stands out to me as an anomaly is simply the 2.9 million as a location factor. That's something that I don't think a lot of people in the community necessarily appreciate. Like, it's going to cost us more simply by dint of we don't have major builders in the immediate area. We were quite fortunate with the Public Works that we were able to bring in a builder from out of town, and they did come in under budget. If we're looking at kind of the actual cost of the building, 11 million, that's kind of what we were all hoping it would come in at. All of these other costs are costs that are beyond our control. They're market-based costs. And so we need to be aware that, these cost escalators exist. But I think, and I feel like I'm getting the sense from around the table that, if we're just a little bit more aggressive in the RFP and going out and trying to tender this better, we might not be seeing that 20 million. We might be down 14, 17, who knows? I mean, we're still early days, but I'm not nearly as shocked by this number as I dove into the numbers and actually looked at what it is. It's not nearly as big of a discrepancy, if you will, to other communities and what their fire halls are costing.
Thank you. Well, and we still have to go through the cost delivery or the project delivery method analysis too. And of course, we'll favor the cost delivery method that is most likely, and historically contained costs throughout the construction process. So, we're still, or to your point, we're still early days. There's still opportunity to refine these costs considerably. Councillor Roddy Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just going a little further down the road with Councillor Hamilton, I noticed that Creston and West Kelowna actually were using the same construction company. And I remember talking to Creston's CAO last year at UBCM, and they were able to control their costs and actually in some cases reduce their costs by the use of the project manager and those types of things that they did. I noticed West Kelowna has gone with progressive design build for their concept as well. And again, using that same contractor. So I'm assuming Creston would face some rural challenges that we would have. And they did, between referendums, sharpen their pencils. But I also do recall their CAO telling me that the referendum lost the first go around, added $1 million to the cost of the fire hall.
Yeah. Mr. Bornowski.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, there's a number of different considerations. We've talked about some of those delivery methods, and in looking at things like design bid or design build contracts, they look really good because you have a fixed price, but you need to know your budget and have funding in place because you don't have the flexibility to have an exit clause based on a referendum. And so if you're going that route, you're investing in early design to get to better cost certainty, whereas you might have a more flexible, progressive design bid build program that gets you cost certainty enough to go to referendum. But we need to work on that and look a little bit more closely at what are our options that get us through design promptly, and what is the market's interest in terms of who might build this and what do they want to bid on.
Chief Morgan.
I did happen to talk to Chief Jason Brolin from West Kelowna yesterday, and he said that it was 14.3 million, but with the design bid build, they actually put close to $1 million into the design prior to that. So that's an addition. Also part of that whole build, it was there was no offices, there's no front-facing counter. They did have a gym and dorms, a day room. But at the end of the day, like he said, they only have to have 5 parking spots. They've got 4 guys that work there full time, rotating, obviously. And so all of these, that's why it's so important to be specific to the needs that you have for your community. So anyways, I just want to point out that there was extra costs and it wasn't the same build that we're going to do here. It's very different.
Councillor Roddy Kelly.
Oh, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, totally fair, Chief. I was thinking more along the lines of some of the strategies they're using to get the thing done, more so than obviously ours is going to be different, right? They just sounded like they used some innovative things to get the money, more so than, and I think I'm just going to be really honest and say that I think it's a really scary number for people, and I am worried about the referendum. When we go to referendum, will we be at like a class B or a class, like where will we be at in our estimate number so that we have certainty that we are asking to borrow the right amount and we have looked at the funding streams for the right amount so that, we will have the money to see the project through to completion.
If I can, Your Worship, that's exactly what we've got to look a little more into. We've started those conversations. We're continuing this Friday with some potential advisors on how quickly can we get to a refined number where we're confident in terms of the cost estimate. What's our delivery methodology look like is part of that question. Are we going to engage in a design contract to get to a design and a quote and hope that that's accurate, or are we going to engage in something of a more comprehensive methodology that includes delivery but has a gate for getting to a firm enough number for referendum the way West Kelowna did? And we just need to bring that back to council after a little more research.
Thank you. With that, I think I will ask Ms. Daniel to read the staff recommendations.
Would you like all three or just the first one first, second one second?
First one first. Second
All
one
right.
second.
That council directs staff to advance the fire hall project based on the conceptual design and recommendations in the Arcadis final report.
Mover, Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor McIsaac. Any further discussion? Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. This is not a place I want to be sitting right now or a discussion I wish to be having. This is an ideal fire hall and it's what the town needs. But we're not in an ideal situation as a town, financially speaking, due to our infrastructure. There's a lot of things that we have, a lot of bills coming due. And as each one comes up, be it a community center, skating rink, a fire hall, pipes, sewage plants, reservoirs, all these things total up and they add up. And the taxes creep up. And part of that is because some of the stuff was built without the future in mind. And part of it was because perhaps we overreached and we've set our expectations too high. I'm not comfortable voting for this, not because I don't think our firemen need a fire hall. They do. Where they're at now is a travesty. I just think that in the context of all the other big ticket items that will come before us, I don't think we can afford to get the best thing in every circumstance. And if we try, there will be something somewhere along that line that we will drop. Yeah, that's kind of my feelings on this. Thank you.
With that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Myself, Councillor McIsaac, Councillor Hamilton, and Councillor Nixon. And those opposed? Councillor Ramirez, Councillor Shoesmith, Councillor Audia Kelly.
The second resolution being that the property appraisals and analysis required to consider property disposition as a funding component of the project be advanced, funded from the facility reserve.
Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Any discussion? All those, Councillor Shoesmith, sorry.
Sorry, Mayor Milligan. Thank you very much. Property once sold is hard to come by in Fernie. And I worry about highest and best use with some of those properties. I'm not sure that selling them at this juncture is necessarily the wisest decision. As once gone, that opportunity for us is gone with them.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. Regardless of whether we choose to sell them or not, we still need to have them appraised and understand. And that's what this particular vote is about. It's not about selling them. It's about finding out what our options are.
What the value is,
I think
yeah.
that's important to do.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Shoesmith and then Councillor
Excellent point,
Kelly.
Councillor McIsaac. Thank you.
Councillor Audia Kelly.
I did want to ask about what we know about our, do we actually have a property portfolio aside from these properties? Like, do we know about all of our properties, and would we only be evaluating these particular properties and not like the portfolio that we have?
The planning department is built and maintains a good lands inventory. These are the properties remaining that are least encumbered. The rest would be significant hurdles to consider for disposition in any realistic timeline related to this project. So we undertook a review of the lands inventory and asked the planning department and the leadership team to consider the encumbrances and the challenges with each of these properties and then bring forward those that made the most sense. And so there's some rationale behind what's being recommended, but fundamentally we are very land poor. It's a very important consideration, but it needs data behind it that we just don't have. You'll see the estimates are based on assessments and recent sales and are, I think, quite plainly inaccurate because we just don't have the data.
Councillor Arnaud?
Which was our experience during Max Church potential sale, right? Like that was something that we kind of realized that the value was appraised by somebody and there was a little bit of disagreement in what that final price should look like. So anyway, my follow-up question is, have we learned anything from that Max Church experience that we might be able to come to bear when we do the land assessment for this?
Mayor and Council, I think, yeah, we had two independent appraisals, one funded by the French language school district and one by the city, and there was a delta. There was a gap between the two assessments, certainly. I think none of these properties are as complex, but certainly looking at really specifically how we direct that assessment, the de-risking work we have to do in terms of geotechnical, and then articulating our procurement of those appraisals to consider specific use to try and get a reasonable value, but not go too crazy. Because the more we complicate it, the more they become subjective exercises in what may be. We're fortunate now in that we've done a number of these based on expressions of interest to purchase city properties. You'll recall from some groups looking to develop market housing, the appraisals required for, say, the old fire hall site, which council, through a very minimal lease, donated to the affordable housing project. We've now had a bunch of recent experience, and so I think we're more well armed to do this.
With that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. And finally,
That a report detailing project delivery methodology and opportunities for design and cost validation be brought forward to council.
moved by Councillor McIsaac, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any discussion? Councillor Audie Kelly.
Thanks, Your Worship. Can I just clarify what we mean by validating the design? Does that imply that we might still change it?
No, I expect it would be a refinement of the design such that the cost could then be refined.
Not design validate. Thank you. That was my question.
My only question is, when would we expect that report, Mr. Bronowski?
As promptly as possible. We have a couple competing priorities, most notably the field house, which is taking a lot of our time. And those projects are just going to take a lot of our time with this in tandem. But Mr. Heisler and I are leading this until we assign specific tasks to, or specific staff to take over that leadership role. And it remains right atop our priority list, just in terms of knowing that not only do we need a fire hall, but we desperately need space for our operating equipment and our operations staff who are also displaced as a result of this temporary accommodation.
Thank you. And I apologize, Ms. Daniel. I'll wait till Councillor Hamilton returns before I call the vote.
We'll know by how long it takes.
Which copy pasted what? Sorry. The recommendation from the agenda? This is awkward. Sure, there'll be a good highlight reel from that one. With that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? You got who's and who? Okay, thank you. Well, that's an important conversation, and it's a very important conversation for our community, and I am committed to moving this forward, however we move it forward, and bringing the community along with us, because I think it's absolutely key to this community's future. And quite frankly, it's key to this community's present as well. So thank you for the conversation. With that, we'll move on to item 11.2, a report from Mr. Bornowski.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a presentation accompanying this report. Council will recall that Dandelion, aka Evolution Charging, had presented to Council earlier this year on an opportunity to partner where they would secure a grant to install zero-emission vehicle charging infrastructure, being a fast charger, additional level 2 or higher chargers. They were looking to lease, create a partnership agreement and lease lands, a very small portion of lands at the skate park, and had considered or had discussed with Council the potential of considering solar for the roof. Council directed that more information be brought back. And unfortunately, we haven't had the capacity to do a good job of bringing that back in a timely manner. However, I have been approached repeatedly by the Evolution team, and justifiably so. There's a federal program that could offer up to 50% funding for such a project. And notably, if they are considered eligible, up to 50% of the cost of developing the agreements and the designs is also recoverable. And so it provides an opportunity for us to, if they are successful in receiving a grant, then undertake the template development and the agreement development and the additional due diligence that Council is seeking prior to actually signing any sort of lease agreement. I think it's a good way to allow this company to apply for a grant. I would note that in an industry scan, not a lot of municipalities are issuing competitive RFPs for single fast chargers or supercharging stations. And this allows for a market-driven initiative to see if it's successful in receiving some grant funding, and then allow that to trigger us to then undertake some work while also recouping some of the costs for said work. It feels like a low-risk initiative. I attached the information collected from or received following discussions with the Community Energy Association. It's generally straightforward, and I think we're not looking to reinvent any wheels. This type of a model is essentially the Electrify the Kootenays project, but now expanded and leveraging this federal funding stream. So I am recommending we advance it, with the understanding that no real work advances other than a letter confirming support for advancing it until we know whether they were successful or not in their application.
So just for clarity, they don't need a commitment for a lease on that.
They do not. It's a strengths-based application. A lease would make them look really good to the federal government, but a commitment to advance as written has been developed to support their application to a point where everybody's comfortable.
Okay. Councillor Ramirez.
I just want to move it, Your Worship.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Ramirez. Are you seconding it? Seconded by Councillor Shoesmith. Any discussion? Councillor Artie Kelly.
Just one little question. What is the address of that parking lot? It's not the same parking lot we were looking at selling, right?
No, this is the skate park parking lot that was just paved with the completion of our parking paving grant from a few years ago. And it would be just co-located at the new skate park. No, this is for retention. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. And you didn't have to read it even. Lucky. Item 14, correspondence. Is there anything anybody would like to reference in correspondence while we're there? Councillor Ramirez.
Just the data set that is available for that Yellowstone to Yukon is pretty interesting. I hadn't had the chance to look at it, but some of the maps and overlay of wildlife recreation kind of things was very interesting. Like again, just general knowledge, but I just thought this was pretty interesting that like probably this is the first time, at least that I have seen, where non-motorized recreation has been quantified and seen, what kind of effect it has on the wildlife.
Yeah.
Not good or bad, but it's just something that I did not know. And this is probably the first time where I can actually go and access the data and say, okay, we have these biking trails in and around Fernie. Like, what effect is it having on grizzlies or wolverines, for example?
Yeah.
Like it's pretty interesting. So I hope that this might provide opportunity for all these different user groups, be it your ADV user groups or Rod and Gun Club or the Trails Alliance, to come together and actually make decisions based on the data that is available here.
Yeah, I was struck by the same thing. With Tourism Fernie and the RDK, and with most of the recreation around the community happens in the RDK, that it would potentially influence planning and a larger conversation about potential impacts to wildlife. I didn't, like you, I looked at the maps available, but I didn't really dive into it. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I was just wondering if on our agenda for Friday, do I have my date correct? Our immediate C2C with the Ktunaxa Nation, if we have the opportunity to add 14.1 to our agenda to discuss with them and what their thoughts and feelings are around the city adopting UNDRIP, before we.
Yeah,
make a
I don't
motion
think we'd
towards that.
add it if we had added it to the agenda. Yeah, we could certainly do that. Reading through the resolution from the First Nations Summit, it wouldn't be without cost implications for the city in terms of, I'm not suggesting we don't do it. We'd want to understand the impact because there's reporting requirements and so yeah, we certainly raise it with them. Yeah. Councillor Shoesmith.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. On that note, I mean, first two letters of UNDRIP's the UN, and as a municipality in Canada, we're kind of beholden to two things, our voters and our higher orders of government within Canada. So we're not under any obligation for any of that. So definitely we should look at that with a critical eye and understand fully the implications before we go ahead with anything.
Yeah, and it was certainly their intention by the letter. They were approaching higher orders of government to insist that municipalities at their direction follow UNDRIP, but those higher orders of government hadn't made that determination yet. So we can potentially anticipate it at some point. Both have, yes. Yeah. British Columbia and Canada. Yeah. Good. If there's nothing else under correspondence, I think we'll skip reports from council members if that's all right, unless there's something really burning that folks want to discuss. And I'll ask Ms. Daniel to read the resolution to close.
That the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 91K of the community charter, as the subject matter being considered at this time relates to negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages, and that in view of council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public.
Can I have a mover? Councillor Ramirez, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any discussion? All those in favor? We're now in closed. I thank everybody for joining us this evening, and we will take a 5-minute recess if that's all right.